Hola muchachos! In today's lesson, you are going to practice with the differences between the preterite and imperfect tenses in Spanish. Now that we have worked on conjugating each of the tenses, we will begin to look at how to identify when to use each one in Spanish. Be sure to take good notes during this screencast so you can use the information to help you complete the practice activities that will follow. Even though the preterite and the imperfect tenses are both used to talk about the past tense, when and how they are used are very different. Here is an explanation of how these two tenses are used in very different ways. If you recall from an earlier lesson, the preterite tense is used in Spanish to talk about an action that was completed in the past. In English, this would look like the following sentence. Yesterday, I bought a new shirt. In Spanish, we would say, Ayer yo compré una camisa nueva. The completed action in this sentence requires the use of the preterite tense in Spanish because it is bound by time. Another way in which to use the preterite tense is when you are talking about the beginning of an action or the end of an action in the past tense. Here is an example of what that might look like in both English and in Spanish. It began to rain. Empezó a llover. Or, the class ended. At 9:20, la clase terminó a las 9:20. The preterite tense is also used to talk about an action completed at a specific time in the past, such as Ramona studied at 5 o'clock, or Ramona estudió a las 5, or to talk about an action that was completed for a specific amount of time in the past, such as Sergio watched TV for 3 hours, or Sergio vio la televisión por 3 horas. Finally, another use of the preterite is to explain a series or sequence of events, such as what you might see in the plot of a story. One way to look at this is to evaluate the series of sentences to determine if they are sequential or chronological, meaning bound by time, or perhaps like a chain reaction or cause and effect. Here is an example of what this could look like. Susana woke up, Susana brushed her teeth, and then ate breakfast. Next, she got dressed and left for school. In Spanish, we would say, Susana se despertó, Susana se cepilló los dientes y después comió el desayuno. Luego se vistió y salió para la escuela. If you notice in this example, the steps in the story are sequential or bound by time and follow a logical order, almost like a chain reaction. Each completed action is followed by a new and logical next step. Now, let's look at the different ways in which the imperfect tense is used when talking about the past tense. The imperfect tense is used in order to describe a repeated action in the past tense. What does that mean? Any action that took place on a routine or habitual basis, such as I used to go to the park every Saturday, or I would eat dinner every night at 6 p.m. Here's another example. Roberto would go to bed at 11 p.m. every night. In Spanish, we would say Roberto se acostaba a las 11 cada noche. This sentence clearly describes a routine action was taking place due in part to the clue word used, every night. The imperfect tense is also used to describe an ongoing action in the past tense. In English, an ongoing action is identified by using the structure was or were plus a verb that ends in the suffix ing. Here are a few examples. She was running. Ella corría. They were studying. Ellos estudiaban. It is important to note that ongoing actions in the imperfect tense can also appear in compound or complex sentences. A compound or complex sentence is one that is made up of two different clauses, such as a dependent and independent clause. They will often be connected by a conjunction such as the word when or cuando. That means that you can have both a preterite and imperfect verb in the exact same sentence. Here's an example. My mom was cooking dinner when the phone rang. This sentence is a compound sentence connected by the conjunction when. In Spanish, we would say, mi madre cocinaba la cena cuando sonó el teléfono. In this sentence, we have two clauses connected together by the conjunction cuando, which means when. Notice that in the first clause, your verb appears in the imperfect tense. That is because cocinaba is my ongoing action. Notice that the verb in the second clause, sonó, appears in the preterite tense. That is because sonó is viewed as the interrupting action. Oftentimes, the imperfect tense is used when talking about things such as someone's mental, emotional, or physical state. Here are a few examples. Juan wanted a dog, or Juan quería un perro. In another example, we see Cristina was sad, or Cristina estaba triste. Both of these sentences describe emotional states in the past. The imperfect is used with these states of being because they are not generally thought of to be bound by time. The imperfect tense is used to describe how things were or what things were like. In other words, we use the imperfect tense when describing the characteristics of people, things, or condition. This can include physical appearance, such as they were good looking, eran guapos, or describing characteristics such as color. For example, the house was white, or la casa era blanca. The imperfect can also be used to describe a personality trait such as I was well behaved, yo era bien educada. The imperfect tense is also used when talking about time in the past. This can mean making statements about giving the day, date, month, year, or the time of day. In addition, the imperfect tense is used to describe someone's age in the past. Remember to use the verb tener when you are describing someone's age. Here are some examples. It was Monday, era lunes. This sentence describes the day in the past. It was March 3rd, era el 3 de marzo. This sentence describes the date. It was 7:30. Eran las 7:30. This sentence is describing the time of day. You can also use the imperfect when talking about age, such as tenías 5 años, you were 5 years old, or talking about the weather. Remember that when you are talking about weather conditions, you will most likely use the verb hacer. Here are a few examples. It was warm, hacía calor. It was cold, hacía frío. There are some tricky verbs in Spanish that will change meaning depending on whether you use them in the preterite versus the imperfect. Take a look at the list of verbs and pause this video. Write down the list of verbs and the changes in their meanings. You will need to memorize these verbs and to always be careful to make sure you know what these are in Spanish so you use them correctly. Now let's take a look at these sentences to see if you can figure out whether the preterite or imperfect form of each verb should be used in the following sentences. Pause the video now and write down your answers to practice with the differences between the preterite and imperfect. Now, check your answers for understanding. Number 1 uses the imperfect because it is a sentence that describes weather. Number 2 uses the imperfect because it is a sentence that describes a mental state. Number 3 is the imperfect because this sentence is making a general description. Number 4 is using the imperfect because I am describing age. Number 5 is using the preterite because I am talking about the beginning of an action. Number 6 uses the preterite tense because it is describing a past action that was completed at a specific time. Number 7 is using the preterite tense because it is describing an action that occurred at 5 o'clock. Number 8 is using the imperfect tense because the sentence is merely describing the date. Gracias por su atención. Hasta luego.